I don't look like a classicist. I have a shaved head and a big old mustache, and I dress like a lumberjack. My constant study of Lucretius has turned me into a joke of myself, where I can actually think about what it means to be male. And Lucretius is right. Life is better for me when I don't act out in a traditional quote-unquote masculine way. And it's taken, my adult life to rethink what masculinity looks like for me.
Mike Pope is a professor of ancient literature, the classics. And it's true, he looks more like a lumberjack than a college professor. But love is a strange mistress, and this manly man fell head over heels in love with the epic poetry of an ancient Roman philosopher named Lucretius. The more Mike studied, the more he realized Lucretius's message about men is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. Learning about ancient views of sex and gender sheds a ton of light on how we think about sex and gender today. Mike Pope joins us to talk about his book, Lucretius and the End of Masculinity. I'm journalist Blair Hodges, and this is Relationscapes. We're mapping the stories and ideals that shape who we are and how we connect with each other so we can build a more just world together. Mike Pope joins us on Relationscapes. Mike, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We're looking at your book, Lucretius and the End of Masculinity. So we're going further back in time than usual in this episode. This is back to the 1st century BCE. This is like 100 years or so before Jesus or thereabouts. Rome is the place. Lucretius is our guy. Tell us a little bit about Lucretius and why people today might find him interesting.
Weirdly enough, we don't know a whole lot about Lucretius and his biography. A few things that we do know is he's got a really, really old-timey Roman name of the equivalent that it goes all the way back to Rome's founding mythology. The Lucretii were there at the very beginning. So we can assume that he is from upper crust aristocratic classes, highly educated, probably was from a political family, meaning if he himself did not, then other men in his family held political office, fought in wars, did all the things that Roman aristocratic men would do. Outside of that, we know almost nothing. He is mentioned by Jerome. Some people refer to him as Saint Jerome, and Saint Jerome has some nasty things to say about Lucretius, but Saint Jerome has a lot of nasty things to say about many people who he disagreed with. So we discount those as being not biographical at all. One thing that we can nail down historically is that he, if not knew personally, then at least felt comfortable addressing this guy Memmius, who appears a few times in the poem. Memmius was historical. Contemporary, he held the second highest political office at Rome, praetor, and he failed to make the highest office, but an important figure at Rome nonetheless. And then the other historical thing we can nail down is that Cicero, the great Roman statesman, politician, sometimes poet, although not very good, and letter writer and so forth, mentions Lucretius and his poems in a letter. A very brief mention, but it helps us nail down the historical moment when some of these verses, at least, were being circulated among literary classes.
Okay, so we're trying to figure out who Lucretius is. We have a couple mentions of him by important people. But the biggest thing we have is this poem that you mentioned, and that's what your book focuses on, is this huge epic poem. And your book is about that poem, and the title of your book, Lucretius and the End of Masculinity. I wondered if there's a double meaning to that, like the end of masculinity, as in, is Lucretius sort of challenging masculinity? Is he also talking about the end or the purpose of masculinity? Because it could be both of those things.
Yes, it's at least a double entendre, if not a triple. So the end of the received masculinity for elite Roman men, and as in a new purpose to redirect their energies towards, and also making them the butt end of a recurring joke throughout the poem.
Okay, so he's challenging Roman masculinity here. His poem is called On the Nature of Things. It's a really long poem. There have been a number of theories about what exactly Lucretius was trying to communicate to his audience. So your book builds on that past work, but you suggest some new things about what Lucretius was trying to do. And before we dig into specifics about that, give us the movie trailer version of Lucretius's poem. If there's like a movie trailer coming this summer, Lucretius's On the Nature of Things, what would the gist be in that movie trailer?
In a world where men dominate, rich men dominate. I mean, they control property, the levers of political power, the levers of military aggression, the law courts. Powerful men controlling everything right down into their homes. A fairly well-known word, paterfamilias. They have legal standing in their homes to contract marriages, to end marriages, to actually enact the death penalty upon their dependents if they choose to. It would be a rare thing. Really utmost control. This is the Rome that Lucretius is born into. This is his heritage. This is also his birthright. He could have accepted it and moved forward on that course of life. In the movie trailer version, it would go something like this. But one man stood up to all this. Well, Lucretius wasn't the only person, but he was a person. And he didn't like it, and he had adopted a foreign philosophy, Epicureanism, and he decides that he's going to convince his audience, his social cohort, that they're all wrong.
And the way he's going to do that is scientific. Like, he's trying to give this really materialistic scientific explanation of the natural world. Like, how does the world actually work? And he's going to do that, you say, to make people less afraid of death, to help them not feel a fear of divine punishment. And he's trying to sort of promote this like happy, tranquil life. If people understood how nature works, they would better understand what it means to be a man and how men should act and behave and everything. So he's like, science is going to kind of solve the question of like what men should be. And as you said, it's a send up of Roman masculinity. And he's going to kind of make fun of what a real man was supposed to be. As he's doing that, how acceptable do you think this was? Do we know how it was received, or if there were other poems that were doing similar things? Do we know, did he wind up like Socrates, like getting killed and stuff? Like, what happened here?
Romans had a bit more leniency with poets than perhaps, earlier generations. He seemed to have suffered nothing negative from his poem, but we actually don't know. We don't have a lot in the first generation reading his poem reception history. We know that Cicero read them and he found the poetry brilliant, although there's kind of this ellipsis where he's like, but, the philosophy, Cicero is not a fan of Epicureanism.
It's like, that song rules, but the lyrics aren't great.
Yeah, I like the beat. Lucretius, we know from later generations. When I say later generations, I only mean like 30 years. The next generation loved his poetry. The next generation of poets loved his poetry. And they cite him and riff on his style, on his word choice, on some of his philosophical underpinnings. So he was received heartily later. At the moment, we don't know. That's as far as we can really say.
Is it, this is sort of speculative, but I think like if he had some kind of terrible death or something, it seems like his later haters maybe would have like brought that up or something. So maybe he died like a nice death or something, otherwise they would have been like, haha, remember when Lucretius totally got, screwed or whatever.
And that's probably true because it would take 400 years and a somewhat vindictive, ill-tempered Christian, Jerome, to pander this nasty slander about him, that he took a love filter, which is like a love potion, and has some magic involved because he was madly in love with somebody and then he died out of lust or love, which is completely ridiculous. If you've read the poem, you know that Lucretius is pretty much against that sort of erotic adventure.
Yeah. So it seemed like later Christians then would sort of be attacking Lucretius because they didn't like the message behind it. Is that, and it was still influential? Is that kind of what was happening?
Yeah. And so you go with the most basic attack that anyone does, and that's ad hominem kind of thing.
Like, attack his character. Okay, good. So let's talk about where Lucretius begins in the poem, which is with beginnings. It's sort of like the book of Genesis in that way. Like he's going to talk about the genesis of life, how sexual procreation works. And in your book, you say that what we call the scientific explanation of procreation, like the biological how, would also be used by Lucretius to inform ethics. So like how sex works would tell us something about life and our values. Like the how is the therefore. How babies get made tells us what our lives are supposed to be about. So how did he explain the science of procreation and tie it to those ethics?
Yes, and I just want to reiterate that for Lucretius, science is a tool for the greater purpose, and the greater purpose is ethics. That's always the goal. Okay, so the science of procreation. Although this initially will seem unfamiliar to us, we can adjust quickly.
Yes, it was very interesting.
So for Lucretius, the world and the universe is one of two things. It's either stuff or not stuff, and the not stuff doesn't exist. This is emptiness or void. Stuff that is all made out of atoms. Atoms from the Greek word just not cut or not cuttable. Similar to our idea of atoms, although of course we've cut atoms and done horrible things with that. But these atoms are everything. If it exists, it's atomic. And Lucretius's atomology is pretty rudimentary. And so everything can be explained by atoms and atoms in motion. Now, when we talk about procreation, for Lucretius, he does not have the concept that we have of sperm and ovum. Not yet. But what he does have is the idea of seed. And there is male seed, which is not unfamiliar. I mean, that's still kind of an awkward thing to say, but people would understand if I talk about seed.
Yeah.
But for Lucretius, he posits also female seed. Now, again, no ovum, but female seed. And so in the act of procreation, during sex, both male and female ejaculate in some way, and they both produce and emit seed. And then that atomic seed interacts, coalesces. The way he describes it is like a battle.
Yeah.
And whichever side has like the more copious amount or it overpowers, then the offspring looks like the mother if the mother seed wins out in the war. But he plays with the war imagery because, again, it's always the joke against Roman men. And so the joke is, hey, all your semen totally loses to female semen when your kid looks like your wife. And so it's a joke, but the joke is real because every Roman man will have seen this firsthand. Oh, why does my kid look like my wife?
So he's basically saying like, haha, you lost to a girl, which to Roman masculinity would be really offensive. Like, oh, you know, that's the epitome of weakness, is like being dominated by a female.
Yes. And then it's redoubled and worse by the fact that you were beaten down by semen, and not just semen, but female semen.
Yeah.
This is totally emasculating.
Yeah, and you point out that this wasn't Lucretius trying to be feminist. He wasn't trying to elevate women and sort of put them on equal plane with men. It was more about demoting men to a lower plane. So everybody is sort of on this equal plane, and compared to the earth and the universe, everybody's relatively powerless. So he's talking about human procreation, and then he's situating it in terms of like how Earth was created and how the universe works. This is pretty amazing, though. I mean, they didn't have, microscopes to look through and figure out. So to come up with these ideas about atoms and stuff, it's pretty cool. Like, we can kind of chuckle about it now because it is sort of elementary, and yeah, they thought both had sperm. They didn't know about eggs, etc. This is an interesting theory, and as you said, he's using it to talk about the proper role of men and women, and I feel like we still are kind of there. Just to give people an example, during the 60s, there was a great feminist thinker who was talking about how egg and semen interact, and their theory, feminist theory, was that the egg takes in the sperm, like grabs the sperm and wrestles it in, and like rather than being penetrated, it would be the dominator. It would like grab a sperm in, and that, that's still something that people might think about today. And you're saying back then there was this idea of warfare that was happening in the act of sex, that these sperms were sort of battling each other. So anyway, I really liked your explanation of this, and it was very foreign to me, but as you said, also kind of similar.
Yes, and let me jump in with an important upshot of this. After the imagery of warfare, Lucretius goes on at some length to ensure that his audience knows that in order for ejaculation to happen, there has to be a pleasurable component. Now, this for a male audience would be, of course, a given from their mindset. But what he also wants his male audience to know is that female pleasure has to be there as well. He doesn't come out quite and say it, but for female ejaculation, there needs to be pleasure on both sides. And he uses terms like mutual pleasure and mutual fervency and mutual joys in the act of procreation. And that right there is somewhat revolutionary, to be thinking about female pleasure as a key component to procreation.
And I mentioned how he also ties this into Earth too. How does he view kind of the creation of the Earth and how that sort of parallels human procreation?
Yes. So our language here is going to fail us because when we say create, it automatically presumes a grammatical agent, a creator, and then a created thing.
Yeah, like a person who created.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, but we have to use the language that we're given. So creation is going to fail us. But that being said, Earth comes to be. And the way it comes to be is atoms in motion, atoms colliding, atoms coalescing, cohering, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually on this large mass of atoms, things come to be. But Lucretius does not have a well-developed theory of evolution. There is kind of like evolution after things exist, but he doesn't have a really good explanation for how things initially came to exist. And so he puts forth this kind of ridiculous image that he himself kind of makes fun of how things first got started. And he refers to Mother Earth, and Mother Earth has wombs all throughout the soil. And in another shot across the bow, he refuses to allow there to be a male creator figure. So there's not a god creating this. There's not a god sowing the earth. Nope. It's just a Mother Earth with her own wombs that she then self-inseminates and then self-gestates and then self-birds, completely cutting out the middleman or the creator man. Yeah, there's no male counterpart in his kind of funny little creation myth that he puts in there.
And again, he would want Roman men to take away from that maybe they're not the primus, they're not the prime agents, they're not the top dogs, so to speak.
There's no Jupiter here. It's just Earth. It's just Gaia or whatever.
So as men are kind of supposed to be reconfiguring their relationship to sex away from something that's dominant and aggressive, you point out that their loss of semen, for example, is pleasurable, that giving something away, that the loss of something can be a good thing. So again, he's challenging an idea of accumulation as the best thing, that sometimes something can feel good when you give it away. And so he doesn't always use that war metaphor when he's talking about semens combining, male and female semens combining, but he's also talking about how men could take pleasure and joy in giving something away, not taking something.
Yes, pleasure in cooperation. He does an anthropological study in his mind of what it would look like when primeval peoples, like cavemen, whatever, decided or were compelled to join into the most basic social contracts. And as always for Lucretius, it's going to be atomic. And for this moment, it's also sexual. In this primeval period where we have humans walking around, they're living alone. They occasionally join together in sex, and he gives three options. He says either it's by compulsion or it's by gift. And there he says like acorns and special pears, like you give food for sex, or mutual pleasure. And he says this is how the species survived early on. But there came a point, and it's not like it was some sort of one singular moment, but probably like there is an epoch where male humans started to notice that females, when they had babies, were left in incredible pain, and there was a long recovery, and they were extremely vulnerable. And then the babies were also extremely vulnerable. And in this moment, post-sex, many months later, males of the species looked upon the pain and vulnerability of the females and the babies, and the actual sight of their pain and their weakness and vulnerability. This is atomic. And it comes back at the male, and he sees pain, and he realizes that he needs to give something of himself to alleviate this pain. And so he extends his ability to help those suffering, and then he realizes he needs help from others. And so these early primitive humans started to signal to the next primitive humans in the next cave over, let's not hurt each other. Let's protect these weak ones and ourselves being weak, let's join together. And so he points to sex and childbirth as these kind of humanizing events that changes the trajectory of the species.
Would that have sat well with a lot of his audience, or was that a different idea? Like the audience that he was challenging, the masculine audience, how would they have thought about that kind of thing? I know it's speculative. We don't have journals and records where they're unpacking their response to Lucretius, but based on general thinking at the time, how do you think they would have responded to that?
Yes, and again, this is speculative. I find it strange and compelling that we have men in the room, so to speak, at childbirth. This would not have been normal parturition practices in Rome. Men would not have been there. If there was a doctor, maybe a doctor would have been there, but there would have been midwives, and the men would have been somewhere else. So the fact that he has this kind of intimate scene of birth and the sights and the sounds and the smells, all the things that you perceive during childbirth, to have the husband or the father right there is itself somewhat strange. I don't know how this would have sat with Roman men. Sometimes we over-ascribe harsh masculinity to Roman men, like they weren't caring fathers and they weren't devoted to their children. That's probably overdoing it. We have plenty of sources where Roman fathers are definitely concerned about their children. However, the child death rate, age 12 and under, was so incredibly high that we also have to imagine that Roman parents didn't get too attached to their children until they had come of age a little bit. And so to have these primitive humans so invested in the welfare of a mother and the welfare of a baby is a bit revolutionary and way more intimate than I've found in other Roman literature.
All right, so let's talk about your third chapter. Chapter 3 looks at our lives and how we experience life through our senses. Senses are really important to Lucretius here. Our sight, hearing, taste, all of these things. And for Lucretius, it's all about penetration in the sense that Lucretius says our senses are constantly penetrated. Talk about why he focused on penetration and what that means.
Okay, so to answer the last thing first, he's going to play with the image of penetration over and over throughout the poem, because that's the basic joke, is that Roman men are penetrable. And this would be socially anathema for a Roman man of privilege. He is never penetrated. In the act of sex, he is always the one who does the doing. He is the actor. And if he is the sexually receptive party, that undermines his masculinity and could, in fact, damage his career. We know this. A nasty rumor, perhaps true, about Gaius Julius Caesar, the famous Julius Caesar, was that in his youth, he was the beloved of a certain king from the East. When I say beloved, that I'm using that very specifically. He was not the lover, but the one who received the love, which meant that he was sexually penetrated, probably anally or orally. That was the rumor. This dogged him throughout his political career. There was a time when Caesar was very powerful, and a kind of up-and-comer poet named Catullus, an exact contemporary of Lucretius, writes a really nasty poem about Caesar and accuses him of being sexually receptive. Caesar takes great offense at this. They eventually have a reconciliation. But Caesar's worried about the rumor. Now, so that's the underpinning of why the penetration image has such a pointedness to it for a Roman audience. Now, sense perceptions. So again, our language is going to fail us. I'll use an example I use from the book. When I say in English, I see you, I am the subject, you is the object, and see is the verb there. And I'm seeing you, like I'm putting the action of my seeing upon you. But that defies what we know about physics. In the most basic sense, I don't ever see you. You project things at me. So we understand that light photons bounce off of a surface and then strike my eye. Mm-hmm. So really, you are seen to me or something like that.
And because we know about light protons, we would know that like the light itself is what's making it's like affecting our physical body in a way. Like
yes. Yeah. So these photons for us, we grew up with this, we know it. For Lucretius, it's a slightly different physics. He didn't understand light photons bouncing off of things. For him, every solid thing is made of atoms, and those atoms aren't in a completely solid state, which means that surface atoms are constantly shearing off of a thing and moving through space and air and hitting other things.
He might get this like if you slammed your hand down on a dusty surface and you see like dust.
Yeah.
Like that would be like, oh, that's pieces of the desk like flying off into our eyes or something.
And he uses a very similar image of that to explain how there's always these atoms in motion. So when I see you, I'm not seeing you, I'm seeing the surface atoms shearing off of you, striking my eye. So the act of sense perception for sight is an act of penetration. I don't acknowledge anything until some piece of you, literally piece of you, has entered into my eyes. Mm-hmm. And this persists for smell. That's an obvious one. We understand that olfactory sensation is particulate, which is gross when you think about it, but quite intimate also.
Yeah. If you're in the bathroom, that's terrible.
Yes. You've never...
Microscopic pieces of poo are
That's exactly right. There's no such thing as like a virtual smell. No, if you smell something, it's real. Taste, also obvious for us. So every sense perception is a particulate transfer and reception. Therefore, it's a penetration. Now, if we expand this to a basic human conversation where I'm looking at you face to face and we're speaking back and forth, that is a nearly all-encompassing act of interpenetration. If I'm close enough to you, I can smell the deodorant you're wearing or what you had for lunch. This is a very closely bound moment, and Lucretius plays upon this at length.
Yeah, if you start to really think about it, it is really intimate. We can touch each other at a distance. We can today. Lucretius extended this, as you said, to sight. So it wasn't just the light photons. It was pieces of a body that were striking you. And so Lucretius, instead of saying something like, I see that dog, he would have to say, that dog is making me see him. Like, I'm being penetrated by that dog in that sense. And so, as you said, Roman masculinity was against penetration. It seems to be highly homophobic in a sense, an idea that, like, there was something really wrong about being penetrated by a man. Maybe talk about that a little bit, how homophobia might be situated historically, because the way homosexuality, quote unquote, would be thought about at the time was different than what it is today. So maybe talk about that, how we might think of homophobia in the context of their fear of penetration.
Yes, and this is a very important point. Most of our terms and even our discourse and our ideologies around sexuality don't exactly map well onto what we think we know about ancient concepts of sexuality. And again, here we're beholden to our sources, which are written by elite males for the most part. And so this is a limited scope that we have to keep ourselves to. But our basic schemas don't quite work. A Roman man of standing and property and some wealth could engage in any sexual act with any other party so long as he is the one who is the actor. Meaning having sex with a male slave, no big deal, so long as he's the penetrating party. A female slave, all the same. This is not indicative of a Roman man's masculinity if he enjoys penetrating males. There would be almost no accusation of anything like we might think of homophobia. Now, were there certain men who had predilections in various ways and maybe they had like small interpersonal jokes and things? Yes, but for the most part, if a Roman man pursued younger men sexually, that's nothing. It becomes an issue if a Roman man enjoys being penetrated. That's the problem. And there are different forms of this. So if a Roman man likes to be submissive to women, all right, that would be a problem. If he's submissive to another man, that's a problem. If he's submissive to a young man, think someone teenager, late teenager, that's a problem. If a Roman man erotically, romantically pursues a male Roman citizen, youth, that could be a problem if sex occurs. But the attraction, the desire for that, that's nothing. That's just being a Roman man.
Okay, so let's tie this back into how our senses work again. So hearing is something that you spent some time on because Lucretius is talking about men being penetrated by sound. So when people talk to you, you're being penetrated. Speech itself is like semen. He compares it literally to semen. So he's making these connections directly, like the sexual parallel of like hearing something is like being ejaculated into.
Yes. And this is where he sets up his like monumental stunner of a poetic image and joke, and it's a doozy. If you're following along closely through books 2 and 3, you'll start to realize, okay, if I'm hearing this poem performed at me, okay, well, I guess I'm being penetrated. If I'm reading this poem to myself, well, I'm being penetrated through my eyes. Well, let's say I'm doing what most ancient people did. Is most people didn't read it. Ancient people didn't read inside their heads. They always read out loud. So I'm reading this poem by Lucretius, and I'm hearing myself talk. I'm interpenetrating myself, and he starts to build on this. It is kind of a funny way.
Yeah.
But then when Lucretius drops the hammer, he says, now listen, I know that what I'm telling you guys is really hard to take. It's a real bitter pill, bitter medicine. But here's the thing. I'm making it so sweet. I am coating every one of these difficult philosophical precepts in the sweetest honey. And you're going to put it to your lips, and you're going to drink it down, and you're going to like it. And the bitterness will hit you, but you'll be okay because I made it so sweet. And at that moment, a Roman male audience must have felt really strange because they just...
He's saying, I'm screwing you. Like he's literally... Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just I'm screwing you. I just made you the receptor of oral insemination. And this is one of like the primary jokes in Roman political polemic, how you attack your friends on a joking way or attack your enemies in a serious way. You make them into the receiving end of oral penetration. And Lucretius plays on this joke, and he does it not just once. He does it twice, just in case you missed it the first time.
And he's doing it, you say, to hopefully help them sort of accept that, rather than he's not just pinching their noses or like squeezing their shoes. He's also trying to be like, you know what? That's okay. Like all of us are experiencing this. Like the earth itself is constantly penetrating us as we are just going about our day. So he is like doing this really funny mocking sort of satire, but he's also serious, right? Of saying, hey, just accept this. This is just how it is. You need to change the way you relate to the world and each other by recognizing your vulnerability.
That's correct. And what Lucretius is so good at doing is moving from poetic image to joke to offensive joke, and then immediately making himself the butt of that same joke.
Yeah.
And so you'll see this, sometimes translations pick it up well, sometimes it's easier in Latin, but you'll see him switch from you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and then we do this. And he'll use the first person plural, or he'll use the first person singular, I do this. And in this very image of him making his bitter medicine so sweet that you'll want to put it to your lips and drink it, in that same passage, he says, and I have drank from the springs as well. And he turns himself into kind of this effeminate wanderer who was looking, and he was so thirsty, and he comes up on these springs and he drinks them in. And it turns out that the springs come from a person, and that person is a man, and his name's Epicurus. And then he gets really intimate, and he says, these words came from the lips of Epicurus, and I drank them in. And it's like, it's kissing. And then he's going to turn around and purvey it to others. And so it's like this chain reaction.
It's queer.
It is queer.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. And you mentioned Epicurus. Like Epicurus's philosophy, he had this idea of the garden. And I think this is an interesting place to mention this as well, that I learned from your book, is the garden is a place of learning for Epicurus. He would say, instead of a great grand temple with a giant shaft or whatever, like he would go to a garden would be the place of learning. And so people would actually make fun of that. Like Romans the garden was thought to be a feminine place, almost like a vulva, in fact. Like they would think of this as a very feminized thing. And Lucretius is like, no, the garden rules. Like he wants people to appreciate the garden rather than mock it.
Yes. We don't know whether Epicurus chose the nickname for his philosophical school as the garden.
Oh, okay.
But in one of his surviving letters, he refers to, or in his last will and testament, I believe, he talks about wanting to hand the garden, and this seems to be an actual piece of real estate, over to one of his best students. And so he's at least thinking about an actual garden. And very quickly, if not contemporaneously, Epicureanism is the garden. Mm. Now, whether he chose the nickname or the nickname was given or whatever, it just so happens that the word in Greek, kapos, or the word in Latin, hortus, These are charged words. And poetry all over the place, these are euphemisms for sites of sexual trysts or anatomical sites of pleasure. So this doesn't take much, imagination to understand gardens. If there's fruit and there's water, there's irrigation, there are all sorts of shapes of fruits and vegetables. Like, it's pretty obvious stuff. But as you might expect, people who don't like the philosophy are going to capitalize on this and use it polemically.
Yeah, this is where the misogyny comes up, right? Like, oh, it's a bad thing to think of, vulva would be a bad thing. So like anything that sort of brings that to mind would be bad. Like, that's a good way to make fun of a dude.
Yep. And Lucretius, in his stance, kind of counteracting these polemics, is like, oh, yes, it's a garden. It's so effeminate. It's super queer.
Yeah.
And we're all in it.
And queer is a perfect way, because like queer began as this insult, right? And then queer communities took that back and said, oh yeah, we are queer, that, and used it as a badge of honor. It seems like Lucretius is queering in that way of like reclaiming words that could be used as insults and being like, no, actually, yeah, it is that, and that rules.
Yep. And whether you want to or not, you are all part of it. The entire world is a garden. Everything.
Right.
And you are planted and you are the planter. You are the inseminator. You are the inseminated. And in the end, you're going to decompose and something's going to be planted in you. And that's just the way it is.
That's the perfect transition. We're talking with Mike Pope. He's Associate Professor of Classical Studies at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. He earned his PhD in New Testament and Early Christian Literature at the University of Chicago. We're talking about the book Lucretius and the End of Masculinity. So you just mentioned death, right? This is chapter 4 of the book. It's called The Hole That Gapes for All. And you say at the beginning of the chapter that Roman culture was all about glory in war, like war glory. They had all kinds of stories about being brave in the face of imminent death, and death as this glorious thing. If you engage it with bravery and courage and die in a glorious battle, that was like the best thing you could do. So give us a little bit of context, because for me, that's a little hard to wrap my head around. I mean, we have our war heroes, obviously, so we can kind of understand it that way. But this seems to be like next level worship of like war and death.
Yes. When we think of Rome, we often are our images are from the empire, where Rome is this big kind of behemoth dominating the kind of the northwestern world. But in the early and middle republic and into the late republic, Rome was not that. It was a growing thing, and it was often an outnumbered thing, and it fought all sorts of wars. These wars occurred every year. Just like as soon as the spring came, you get your crops in the ground, you go to war. And every male citizen was a warrior. This was an all-encompassing warrior culture. We know nothing like it. So like during the height of World War II, there was still only a small percentage of adult males who were in active military service. And only a small percentage of those would be fighting on the front lines as infantry. In Rome, like everybody was enrolled in the legions, or what would become the legions. There were some wars where these are real numbers. 20% of the adult male population died in one of these wars. This is incomprehensible to us. All-encompassing warrior culture. And every family would have a room or a wall set aside where the ancestors were worshipped and remembered. And there'd be death masks taken, like wax masks made into plaster, or plaster masks maybe made into metal. And there'd be a little description of who it was. And during festivals and funerals, these masks would be taken down, and living males in the family would don the mask of their ancestors and parade around and remember what their family had accomplished in war. I mean, this is deep, like cosplay, remembering the past and great warriors. We know nothing of the sort. So with that as a backdrop, for Lucretius to go past that, and he doesn't want to look at the heroic exploits of Romans fighting, I don't know, Phoenicians or barbarians from the north that was terrifying Germans. No, he's going to take you to the warfare psychologically at home. And that's where he wants to have the fight.
Right. So with all that in mind, you say again that Lucretius wants his audience to see that the way that they are valorizing death is a facade. He says that it actually kind of shows how insecure they really are about death, that all of their bluster in the face of death and the glory of war is really to compensate for a deep fear about what death brings to them.
Yes. And these are two sides of the same coin. One is the fear perhaps of the underworld, whatever that looks like. It's not that Romans were terribly afraid of hell or Hades or whatever. They didn't have a really highly developed concept of that. It existed for sure. And most famously in the next generation of poets, we get it with Virgil in Book 6 of the Aeneid. But there was definitely the idea of, something happens in the next life. Maybe more importantly is your memory, how you are recalled by those who come after. And there's a terror of being found not worthy. And there's a terror of being punished eternally, being conscious of the fact that you failed to live up. This is, the worst possible thing. And so men spend their lives acting out to fend off these fears or to forestall what might happen to them. And so they fight. And so they have to win statues and they have to win honors, everything in the face of this fear of death and the erasure that comes with it. Or worse, erasure of what you did. And again, being conscious of that erasure and powerless to change it. Terrifying existence.
And so how does Lucretius connect this to masculinity? How is he using death to explore what Romans thought it meant to be a man? And he's challenging that.
So Lucretius, again, takes us right to the inner core of a man. He strips off the armor. We're not on a battlefield. We're at home and we're concerned about dying. And what he shows is that when men are afraid, they act out. And the fear of death promotes overconsumption. They want to have it all. They want to have all the fame. They want to have all the women or all the boys or all the men. They want to live so badly that they just overconsume. And he makes an extended image. He says, imagine if we gave nature, here like capital N nature, gave her a voice. And she came to an old man at a dinner. And the old man's just gorged himself. And nature says to him, haven't you had enough? Just push back from the table. Anything more that you have is more of the same. And if you eat any more, you might be miserable anyway. Look what you've had, acknowledge that it's been good, and be done. But that's asking a lot from a culture that only consumes and wants more. Lucretius is trying to convince the Roman man that there is a limit to everything, and that acknowledging that limit is how you can come to accept death. But when you fight against it, what you end up doing is poisoning the one brief life that you have. And so you spend it trying to find the pleasure, trying to find something that fills this gaping void in your soul, which, if you knew where to look, you could draw limits around it, make it much smaller, and deal with it. But it's hard. It's a hard ask.
It's a hard ask then, and it feels like a hard ask today. And you mentioned womb and tomb, like the earth itself is the womb and the tomb. Talk about that visual, because there's a gendered component to that as well.
Yes, I have to input a little personal story here. So as I was researching for this book and writing it, I read Lucretius a lot of times, but for whatever reason, I just missed this image. And I'm reading along in this passage, and I come to it, and it's in the course of 2 lines, he goes from having all earth, Mother Earth being this great omniparens, the all parent with a womb, and then also it'll be the sepulcher for everything that has ever lived. And that was so metal and so hardcore that I was just stunned at how hard it hit me. But yes, Mother Earth is the all-bearing womb. And it's also a tomb. This is not difficult for us to understand. We're all going to go back into Earth. But he sexualizes it. He does not eroticize it. The difference here is what I mean is that if Earth bears us, there is a birthing canal. There's an opening. But that opening doesn't close. It just stands there waiting to take us back in as a grave. But he then extends the metaphor. He says, well, if you came out as a child, you go back in. And now you're the penetrator, but you're not the Roman penetrator of male sexual domination. Now you go back in and you penetrate and you're broken. You are an effeminized penetrator. You go back in not to dominate, but to decompose. And your entire body, which is composed of atoms, and here, this is the wordplay he uses throughout. He doesn't actually use the word atoms, not the Greek word. He uses most commonly the word semina, all right, semen, seeds, or little bits of things. Your body is going to decompose. And upon re-entering the womb or tomb of Earth, you're going to inseminate it, not by ejaculation, but by decomposition. You are going to come apart, and all your seeds are going to go back into the ground, and something is going to come from this insemination, but it's not going to be you, and it's not going to be your offspring, and you will not be remembered. But life will go on, and you're not in it. Again, a tough image to endure.
It's hardcore. Yeah. And he also kind of makes the human into a type of earth as well. Like he points out that our bodies, all of them, are sites of taking stuff in and putting stuff out. We all eat, we all shit, we all consume, we all extrude, we all live, we all die. And so he's also drawing a parallel there between humans and the earth as well. Is that right?
Yes. And he goes right to like the most basic gross image of where do maggots come from? Any dead body lying on the ground, if you watch it long enough, maggots are going to come out of it. And so that's what he does to the human body. You're going to live, O Roman man, in all your power and might, and then you will die, and your corpse is going to get pregnant. And he uses a word here, it's amazing. As your body swells, the gases inside your belly swell, you are going to look like a pregnant belly. But it's like seething, because you're not giving birth to anything but a bunch of maggots. And so he takes death, this could be this honorable moment for a man, and he turns it into pregnancy. And not just pregnancy, maggot pregnancy, because this is what nature does. Take it, man.
Yeah, it's really graphic, and there's also just it feels like from your telling that there's a lot of potty humor in the book too. Like he's definitely not above. I don't know if there are any direct fart jokes or not, but it seems like there were plenty of opportunities to do some fart jokes.
I think if the joke isn't there, it's everywhere anyway. And I've mentioned Catullus before, his exact contemporary. Catullus makes fart jokes incessantly, and of course. A fart joke is a sensuous moment. There's sound, there's smell, but there's also sight, because there's the person who does it who might be embarrassed, and then you have to look at them. It's, again, it's an intimate exchange of material.
Yep, we get penetrated by farts when we're standing in the elevator next to that guy.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Don't quote me on that. Yeah, but yes.
All right, let's talk about this chapter, and I don't know how to pronounce this exactly. Vir recreandus, is that close?
So that's good. Ecclesial Latin, or classical Latin, be instead of the v sound, it's a w sound. So vir recreandus.
Okay.
And for listeners, you'll know this vir sound not for our word virtue or like virtuosity, but in the German word like weregild or werewolf. That were there is the same as Latin wir. It just means man.
Okay. Werewolf.
Yeah.
Man-wolf.
So
okay, cool.
Vir recreandus, a man to be reborn, a man to be recreated. I chose the word wir very specifically. In English, we don't disambiguate very well between man and adult human. If I say there's a man, it doesn't carry a lot of meaning. But for Romans, there is a substantial difference between referring to someone as a wir versus an adult human without masculine status. And this would be homo. Now, it just so happens that when I say that, sounds like I'm making some sort of like homophobic kind of thing. No, homo just means man or adult person. So a woman could be a homo, a man could be a homo. We know this from Homo sapiens or similar terms. So,
well, thanks, Mike. But I say Homo sapiens.
Oh, Homo sapiens, all good. Yes. I constantly am overpronouncing. This is the sad reality of the philologist.
Yeah, exactly.
So the difference between wir and homo is not biological. Everyone has a biology. This is purely sociological. So if you're born with biology, and this isn't taking into account the naturally occurring instances of intersex and so forth, but male anatomy, female anatomy. You are a homo by birth, one or the other, male or female. You earn your masculine status as a weir. Now, how you earn it is through the things we've already discussed: warfare, political success, wealth, success in law courts, and so forth. You are granted the status of weir by the society around you. You can't really claim it for yourself. And it's always a thing that's slippery and easily lost. You could be the ultimate warrior and be amazing, but if you're found out to enjoy being penetrated by a male, you have lost your weir status. And Lucretius is going to have serious fun with this as well. And he plays with it. When he first mentions his hero, Epicurus, in the first few lines of the poem, he refers to him as a homo Graecus, a Greek person. Even the word Graecus is kind of effeminizing for a Roman audience. The Greeks were the conquered people. They were Eastern. They were a little effeminate. And then he calls Epicurus a homo too, just a person. And so a Roman audience would be like, "Oh, that's weird. He's calling his guy just a person." And then he will refer to other people as weir. But as the poem goes on, he's messing with these denominations. And homos become weirs and weirs become homos. And by the end, you're never sure who's doing what. My argument is that by the end of the poem, the categories have been blurred to the point where any homo is a weir and every weir is a homo, and there's not really a weir status anymore. And if there is a weir status, it looks like this. It's the kind of person who, when they see others in pain and discomfort, help them. That's the new weir. And the new homo, if there is going to be a distinction, is the kind of person who only watches out for themselves and doesn't engage in social contracts for the good of others. That's the new homo. That's the undistinguished person with a penis.
This is sort of giving me Starbelly Sneetch vibes, like the Dr. Seuss story where like the Sneetches have the stars, the ones that don't, and then, they're the great ones, and then there's just this whole, they all get mixed up because they're all obsessed with trying to be the elite, and the story's just trying to make fun of that idea that there should be an elite. It's trying to kind of put people on a more even playing field. And you say this is kind of one of Lucretius's biggest takeaways here, because his readers might wonder what the purpose of life is and of what everything is. If his science is correct, if his philosophy is correct, they're like, well, what's the point if we're not supposed to get glory in war or do all this and that? And he's saying, forget all of that. Recognize your weakness, recognize your softness, recognize that we're all penetrated and we all penetrate. And that sets us on this equal playing field. We can stop kind of worrying about who has stars upon theirs if we take that view.
That's right. And the way he drives this point home is the final scene of the poem. And we don't know if the poem actually ends where we have it ending. There's different camps who think maybe we're missing 50 or 100 lines. Maybe he didn't finish it. Maybe it got chopped off. We don't know. I'm of the camp that I think we are missing something, but we take what we have and we interpret from there. The final lines of the poem as we have them are a retelling of a famous plague that struck Athens during the Peloponnesian War. And during this plague, horrible things happen. This is something like the bubonic plague, but worse. And people are dying. There's heaps of corpses. People are suffering. And Lucretius says that those who could tried to lock themselves up in their kind of ivory tower retreats as though they could escape the plague. They ended up dying alone. Those who could and helped others, meaning when I say those who could, those who had the means. Those who had the means to help others, they went and helped because they heard the cries and saw the pain of others. Again, the sense perceptions. Same thing with the primeval people in childbirth. They go and they help, and many of them get sick and die also. But these are the good people. The end. I mean, it literally closes just a few lines after this statement, and it's really understated. But if you finish the poem, you'll have realized, oh, if this is an epic poem, who are the heroes? Well, it's not arma virumque, arms and the man, arms and the weir. This is Virgil's Aeneid. No, it's just these, maybe they're weirs, maybe they're homos. These are people who are able and who help others. And they die also, because that's what nature does to humans. In the meantime, what is the good life is to take care of those around you, because it's a self-interested act. When you want to live in a secure position, you can't demand security. You can't compel security. You can earn security, and you earn it by being decent to others. This is how you disarm the world around you and you bring people together in cooperation. And in the most exigent of circumstances, in an epidemic, the way that you survive it is maybe by not surviving it, but you go and you help, because let's say you do survive it. Are you going to be known as one of those who locked himself away and you survived it like that? Or do you survive it in the act of helping others? Because this will be remembered. And in your one brief life, are you going to be remembered as the coward, essentially the homo? Or are you going to be remembered as the weir, the person who went out on the real battlefield of life and won honor for yourself by helping others? And Lucretius implies it's that one. Those are the real heroes.
And you suggest that the Roman Empire itself might have turned out differently if Lucretius's message was heeded. Talk about how that might have played out compared to what ended up happening to Rome. It seems like that ethic didn't prevail, and that sort of led to more and more problems for Rome that eventually led to the downfall of that civilization.
Yes, and here I want to be a bit more specific. So when Lucretius was writing this poem and thinking about it, these were the final years within the final decade of what we know as the Republic. So his contemporaries were Caesar and Pompey and Cicero and Crassus and so forth. These were the times where the Roman constitution was failing, violence in the streets, corrupted elections, politicians being beaten and beating others, people marching on Rome at the head of armies. This was a disaster for the Republic. Lucretius is writing in this exact moment. His childhood, he probably witnessed it himself or heard the cries of a previous civil war where an army marched on Rome. This was Sulla, who goes into Rome with an army, gathers a whole bunch of people, and mass slaughters them in the forum, thousands of people. He had seen what happens when societies fail. And so he's writing not in a fantasy mode. He's writing in reality. He is begging Romans. Yes, he's making jokes. Yes, he's using kind of sexual humor. But he is begging Romans to reconsider the way that they're living right here and now. Because if this persists, it's not going to be an epidemic that destroys Rome. It's going to be civil discord. We are just going to end up killing ourselves, and this will all come to an end. Now, could he have saved the Republic? Well, I probably not, but maybe. If Caesar had drawn boundaries around what he wanted out of life, how many pleasures and how many honors he pursued, maybe he would not have marched on Rome. Maybe Pompey wouldn't have kept, a more or less illegal command of troops. Maybe he could have set down his arms. Maybe, I don't want to get too in the weeds here of Roman politics, but maybe other players would have been able to go into retirement and enjoy this life on their villa somewhere. Maybe we wouldn't have, maybe they wouldn't have made so many enemies in Rome, up and down the Italian peninsula, on the borders, if they could have wanted less. But these are desiderata, and they're not going to be fulfilled. So the Roman Republic is going to come to an end. Roman Civil War is going to continue on for another full generation, and the empire is inevitable.
I mean, it's really hard not to draw direct parallels to things that we're experiencing today.
Yes.
What masculinity looks like, what civilization and war look like, the purpose of those things. So as a scholar of classics, some people might look at that kind of thing as just, something that as vanity, as like, oh, you can do that, doesn't really matter. But it seems like the message that you're taking from Lucretius and trying to communicate in your book is really relevant today. And I imagine it was hard not to draw parallels with what you're experiencing today when you're writing this book.
Yes, I think I mentioned in a footnote somewhere that the bulk of the book was researched and written during an era where we see kind of a resurgence of strong men. And I use that term specifically, strong men across global politics. And this was before Russia invaded Ukraine. We are seeing a strong man play out strong man fantasies. So I didn't foresee that coming, but that's just what happened. Yes, it's hard not to take all this rather personally. And it's not just me sitting and making judgments on the world around me. This is also my own stuff. I was raised in a certain culture, in a certain time, where masculinity put certain demands on me, demands that ultimately end up being damaging. And it's taken, my adult life to rethink what masculinity looks like for me. And, I'm not a finished product or anything, but I have had to do a lot of rethinking. And as I've done that rethinking internally, I've started to look at the world around me. And I see that so many of our problems are of overconsumption, the desire to control everything, whether it's an internet discussion or, global politics. And so, yes, it's impossible for me not to think about classics in the here and now. In fact, I wouldn't have written this book otherwise. For me, it was a deeply personal study, and situated in this time and place. And 50 years later, if anyone reads the book, it'll feel out of place. Every book is, but for me, Lucretius at this moment seemed to just speak out in a way that, the Aeneid or Lucan Civil War, these other epic poems of the same type, just have not spoken to me.
Maybe give us one example of something you've taken away in how you think about masculinity. And you might have already mentioned it kind of during the course of the interview, but something that you got from Lucretius that you've rethought about what it means to be a man right now. Okay.
So yeah, this is, again, this is all personal, but I think this is a fine setting for it. So although the audience can't see me, I don't look like a classicist. I have, a shaved head and a big old mustache, and I dress like a lumberjack. And I like to live a vigorous life. I like to do tough things. I'm a power lifter. I mountain bike. I mountain bike in the snow all year round. I like to push myself to my limits. I really like feeling alive. This is a better version of an earlier version where I pushed myself because I wanted to be like the strongest guy in the room. I wanted to be, walk in and be confident in my physical strength. This was, a young man's thing. What the constant study of Lucretius has done is it's turned me into a joke of myself, and I'm able to laugh at myself now. And it's helped me kind of repurpose these inborn energies that I have. I have a lot of energy. I have big emotions. I have big appetites and desires. But when I'm able to kind of step back and make a joke of it, the joke creates distance enough where I can actually think about the seriousness of what it means to be male and to inhabit a large body which can enact a lot of violence, physical violence, or, intellectually, I could create a lot of havoc if I wanted to. But, the joke allows me to step back, the humor, and see that's not what I want. Doing all those things in a selfish way is against my own interests. For my own interests, life is better for me when I don't act out in a whatever traditional quote unquote masculine way. No, living in a less masculine way. I don't want to use the word effeminate here, but a less masculine way actually ensures my own enjoyment of life. And it's one of those, you got to test it out to find out for yourself. But in the reverse of the saying, mess around and find out, I've tested around and found out, and Lucretius is right. I don't want to be a traditional Roman weir, not at all.
And that can be a masculinity, like the new way can be a proper masculinity for you. That's Mike Pope, Associate Professor of Classical Studies at Brigham Young University. And we talked about his book, Lucretius and the End of Masculinity. All right, this is the segment called Regrets, Challenges, and Surprises, Mike. It's our last question. You get to talk about something that you would change about the book now that it's out, something that challenged you most in writing it, or something that surprised you most. And I think you mentioned one of the surprises was the womb and tomb one. Like, that's pretty metal. Maybe that's is a good one for that. But do you have any regrets or challenges that we haven't mentioned so far?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. So it's really hard to take everything into account. I was working with largely binary gender and sexuality because that's what most of ancient sources discuss. However, there is things beyond binary in ancient literature. And I put those off to the side because I really wanted to bring out Lucretius playing with the binary to actually destroy the binary. If I would have done it again, I would have gone into a bit more discussion about how Lucretius also acknowledges non-binary and how he works with that. But you can only do so much. Another regret I have, and there's no way I can go back and change any of this, of course, is that at this exact moment that I was writing my book, another scholar at another university was writing her book, which came out like within weeks of mine, called The Crisis of Masculinity in the Age of Augustus. So the exact next generation, she was looking
Wow.
at the same questions. And I wish I would have known that she was working on this. We could have communicated, and we could have had some really important discussions, and certainly would have benefited my own thinking. I'm currently reading her book to write a review for it, and it's amazing, and I wish I would have known about it.
Awesome. For people that do want to hear more about that non-binary stuff anciently, we will have an episode that goes into that more, so that'll be a good companion one to this one. All right, Mike, this has been a lot of fun. I enjoyed reading the book a lot, and I should let people know, too, you and I have known each other for years, and I consider you a great friend and have learned a lot from you.
Same.
Thank you. Have learned a lot from you over the years, in part because I even took a class from you at Brigham Young University when I was employed there, and about this book. So thanks a ton for all your thinking on this and for sitting down with us and talking about it.
Thanks, Blair. It's been really great. Not every scholar gets a chance to actually talk about something that they do professionally, but also love on a personal level. So this was a real privilege for me.
Thank you for listening to another episode, and special thanks to Camille Messick, my wonderful transcript editor. You can check out transcripts at familyproclamations.org. Thanks to David Osler, who sponsored this first batch of transcripts. And if you'd like to sponsor some transcripts, reach out, let me know. My email address is blair@firesidepod.org. I also want to hear from you if you're enjoying the show. I read all the reviews in Apple Podcasts, like this one from JW Stone 2. Their 5-star review says they can't wait to see how the new series unfolds. Well, me too, JW Stone. We're on this journey together. I'm glad to be along for the ride. There's much more to come on Family Proclamations. Also, did you know the number one way people hear about podcasts is through a friend? Your recommendation would mean a lot to me. Tell somebody about an episode and see what they think. Thanks to Mates of State for providing our theme song. Family Proclamations is part of the Dialogue Podcast Network. I'm Blair Hodges, and I'll see you next time.